Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, good any time of the day or night, wherever you are. Peace and blessings. And thank you for giving me just a little bit more of your time in this next session. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to be talking about the last of the chapters in this Willie Lynch letter and the making of a slave. And this one is entitled Controlled Language. As usual, I'm going to go ahead and read it, and then we'll come back and talk about it. Okay? All right. Once crossbreeding is completed for further severance from the original beginning, we must completely annihilate the mother tongue to both the new N-word and the new mule, and institute a new language that involves the new life's work of both. You know, language is a peculiar institution. It leads to the heart of a people. The more a foreigner knows about the language of another country, the more he can move through all levels of that society. Therefore, if the foreigner is an enemy of the country, to the extent that he knows the body of language, the country is vulnerable to attack or invasion of foreign culture. For example, if you take a slave, if you teach him all about your language, he will know your secrets, and he is then no more a slave, for you can't fool him any longer. And being a fool is one of the basic ingredients to the maintenance of the slavery system. If you told a slave that he must perform in getting out our crops, and he knows the language well, he would know that our crops didn't mean our crops. And the slavery system would break down, for he would relate on the basis of what our crops really meant. Therefore, you must be careful setting up the new language, for the slave would soon be in your house, talking to you, man to man, and that is death in our economic system. In addition, the definition of words or terms is only a minute part of the process. Values are created and transported by communication through the body of the language. A total society has many interconnected value systems. All these values in the society have bridges of language to connect them for orderly working in the society. But for these languages and bridges, these many value systems would sharply clash and cause internal strife or civil war, the degree of the conflict being determined by the magnitude of issues or relative opposing strength in whatever form. For example, if you put a slave in a hog pen and train him to live there and incorporate him to value it as a way of life completely, the biggest problem you would have out of him is that he would worry you about provisions to keep the hog pen clean or partially clean, or he might not worry you at all. On the other hand, if you put the same slave in the same hog pen and make a slip and incorporate something in this language whereby he comes to value a house more than he does his hog pen, you got a problem. He will soon be in your house. Okay, so we'll go ahead and go over some of the things that we saw here. But I think it interesting, I'm sorry, I'm flipping through. I think it's interesting that they felt it imperative to control language. Now, remember earlier in this analysis of the Willie Lynch letter and the making of a slave, we talked about Africans being at such a huge disadvantage. One, because they were not in their homeland. And the second, because they were around these people that didn't look anything like them and things that they had no reference to. But three, they didn't understand the language. These people were speaking a language that more than likely sounded like gibberish to them because it wasn't their language. Y'all see that right there? That is not a bug. Okay, that's spot on the wall. Okay, just once, because when I saw it, I was like, ooh. Okay, so anyway, this seeing that controlling the language was important for slavery to be successful is something that we really need to pay attention to. Remember all the things that we have heard in our lifetime, that have been passed down. And if you want to hide something from an African, I'm not going to say what they said, but if you want to hide something from an African, put it in a book, because it was against the law for us to read. Anybody who was caught teaching Africans to read was severely punished, and the African himself or herself was severely punished, unless they had an opportunity to learn to read and then go somewhere else where they didn't have a problem with it. But in the South particularly, and let me also, in plantations in the North, let me just let you know that there were plenty of plantations in the North that held slaves. I am from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and we have often said that there's Philadelphia, there's Pittsburgh, or Harrisburg, I believe, and then there's Pittsburgh, and everything in between is upper Mississippi. Yeah, and it was. I'm telling you. And it is still now, today. You go through there now, strolling through there and act like you belong there. They'll let you know real quick. So I'm just saying that, it was spread throughout the United States, but we know that the large majority, concentration of slaves was in the South. So, they really concentrated on things. And there were people in the North, there were people in the South who tried to help with slavery. But I'm just saying that the lengths that they went through to keep us at a disadvantage. And so even when, and at some point they had to teach us their language, otherwise they wouldn't have gotten anything done. But they taught us their language the way they wanted us to know it, the way they wanted us to understand it. And it was limited either way. I knew a gentleman who lived in Philadelphia. He was an older gentleman. He never learned to read the whole time, and he was in his 80s, and he had never learned to read. We went on a trip to Virginia, and there was a sign of a feed place, and it said Sylvester's, and that was his name. And he could read that. He said Sylvester's. He pointed at it and said Sylvester's because he knew his name. And as far as communicating and with other people, he could do that. You could talk to him about just about anything, especially if he knew something about it. And most of the time, if he knew something about it, it was because that was it was tied to what his occupation had been all of his life. And he knew things like, this is a hammer, this is a screw, this is a screwdriver, this is, things like that. and things that pertain to what he did, um, you know, as a job as he was going through. But he was never able to really promote to higher, but he was very intelligent, very smart, but he was never able to promote to higher positions because he couldn't read. And a lot of those positions, they would say, okay, you have to pass a test. Just like, you know, when they were trying to keep Africans and African descendants from voting, you know, they knew that the majority of them had been prohibited from learning to read. And so they said, okay, well, you have to read this. And if you could not successfully read it, then you couldn't vote. And the whole thing with how many jelly beans are in this jar, which was math, but I'm just saying, you know, they did everything they could, but keeping us from reading. Why? Because reading is fundamental. If you can read a piece of paper, then you can read a dictionary. As a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, that's what Malcolm X did when he was in prison. I'm told that he learned every single word in the dictionary. And after that, it was a wrap. What were you going to do to stop him? You can, you know, what could you say to him that he didn't know? And they knew that we had the ability. It wasn't a matter of intelligence. That's not what was keeping us back. What was keeping us back is controlled language. So they could control the language. They could tell us what they wanted us to do. They could even assess a different meaning for us to a word. And we knew no better. We had no way of saying, oh, wait a minute, no, that's not what that word means. You know, or this is really not what he wants me to do. He's just saying this because he's trying to throw me off. We can do that. And they knew it. So here they had done all kinds of physical and spiritual and psychological things to decimate us as a people. And then they put the icing on the cake and said they cannot learn to read. We have to teach them this language. So using the example that I just read, you know, Master, we need to go and we need to go ahead and get our crops in before such and such a time, or it's going to be too late. They're going to start going bad, our crops. Not realizing that our didn't mean you, my crops, and your crops. You know, but that's the kind of thing that they did and continue to do throughout slavery, so that they could keep us in a specific place, educationally. I'm not going to say intellectually, because intellect was not the problem. There were things that we did intellectually that literally helped plantations do better. But we did it because that was the thing to do, not because we were trying, we weren't necessarily trying to help them. We were trying to help us make our job easier, you know? So anyway, that was the last chapter, that they took language, they used language, and they controlled it so that we would not, a lot of times, even understand from, you know, educationally what they were trying to do to us. Intellectually, I think there was always that ember that was burning, that was saying, hey, these people mean you no good, and you got to get back to your culture and to where you were. And they had so decimated all the, or most of the avenues to us getting back to who we were, that it was just difficult for us. But even to language, they did that. Okay. All right, that is going to be the last chapter. I'll probably go over some of this with a few more videos. But just to let you know, these are the people that we were dealing with and are still dealing with to a certain degree, actually to a large degree today. So I'm going to say thank you for joining me. Peace and blessings to you. And always, always stay woke. And I pray that this has allowed you to be awakened to things that you may not have known before. All right. Love y'all. And talk to you next time.